I want to say two things before this video starts. Firstly, some stories are graphic, so viewers' discretion is advised. Secondly, you might be asking, why are you making this video while there are protests going on in America right now? Why are you glorifying the police? Well, I'm making this video because I don't hate the police. Sure, some of them are racist pieces of garbage, but they see things that nobody should have to see, and I want the general public to know what police and EMT have to go through. So with that said, here are some unfortunately true police/EMT horror stories. Enjoy the video and stay safe out there. I got a call for a missing child, got to the home to find the mother highly distressed and not sure what to do. I called in everyone to first search the home and property. I decided to search the backyard since it was a large wooded lot with no visible fence. After about 10 minutes, I found the boy. He was caught on an old chain link fence in the woods that was blocked by a bunch of trees, so you couldn't see it from the house. He had basically gotten strangled to death on the fence. He must have been climbing on it, fell, and got his hooded sweatshirt caught on it. The worst part for me was having to call this in on the radio, knowing that the mother might hear it inside from under the officer's radio. Not me, but a friend of my parents used to be an ambulance driver. One night, he gets a call for a car accident. A drunk driver crashed its car. Upon arrival, they start checking everyone, only to find the two guys in the front are dead. Trying to get to the back seat, he notices one of the passengers, two girls, is his daughter, who is also dead. He took some time off, went back to work a couple of months later, but couldn't bring himself to drive an ambulance anymore. So he works in the ER for a couple of years. He loved driving ambulances, so after about 4 or 5 years, he requests to be one again. The second day on the job, they get a call for a car crash, so he drives over there and immediately recognizes his own son's car, who smashed the front into a tree. Kid was dead on impact. When he saw what was left of his son, the guy broke down completely. Shortly after this, he was put in a mental hospital by his wife and remaining daughter, and has been there ever since. What you're going to hear may not be the worst thing you've ever heard, but for me, it's what sticks in my head the most. What gives me nightmares on a regular basis. A family of 5 that burned to death in their SUV. They were driving down the interstate when a vehicle going the opposite direction crossed the median, T-boning them, which smashed them into the car that was on their right side as they were passing. This caused their vehicle to engulf in flames. No way out except the back hatch, as their left doors were crushed from the guy who crossed the median, and their right side crushed from the car that was trying to pass. Dad, the driver, died on impact. Mom died from smoke inhalation. Would most have likely lived had she been able to get out. Oldest daughter and youngest daughter were found in the hatch area of the SUV, with the oldest daughter's hand on the release. Both daughters died from smoke inhalation. Mom was found as if she had just aided in getting the youngest daughter in the hatch area of the SUV. Son sitting up front died from smoke inhalation, but most likely would have died anyways due to blunt force trauma and burns. This may not be the most screwed up thing I had to deal with, but it is for sure the most traumatizing thing that I hopefully never have to see again. I was really messed up for a while after that. This family was on their way to the local university to see their son that they hadn't seen in a few months. They were 2 miles from their exit. I volunteered to go with the chaplain and give the notice. This kid lost his whole family in a split second. He said that the last thing he said to his mom was, "Don't come down here, none of my friends' family visits them, and you'll just embarrass me." He was devastated. After all these years, I still keep in constant contact with him, and he's practically another son to our family. Folks, your life or family's life can be over in a blink of an eye. No matter the fight, etc., Always let them know that you love them. Hug them, kiss them, embrace them. I've seen it too much. You just never know when that might be the last time you see them or they see you. Do not take them for granted. A male in his 30s had a massive myocardial infarction on Christmas Eve in his sleep. We get dispatched on Christmas morning at around 7 a.m. I look at the patient. He's obviously deceased. As my partner and I are departing the scene, the patient's 6 or 7-year-old son turns to the mother and asks, "Mommy, is Daddy ever going to wake up?" This was Christmas of 1986, and I will never forget that. Not a cop, but a former medic. We responded to a car wreck in which an SUV had run off the road and into a ditch at high speed, causing the vehicle to flip end over end several times. There was a family of 4 in the car. The father, who was the driver, was unbelted and ejected through the windshield, after which the vehicle landed on him before continuing to flip. He was dead on the scene when we arrived. The mother was in the passenger seat and she was belted, but the belt somehow malfunctioned and she was thrown forward far enough for her head to hit the windshield and put a hole in it. She was alive when we arrived, but barely. The vehicle was severely mangled and we were unable to extricate her quickly. We had to work a trauma code on her while she was still in the seat, intubations, IV lines, etc. By the time the rescue squad could get the vehicle access to remove her, she had been without a pulse for nearly 10 minutes. The second arriving unit continued CPR on her during transport to the ER, but she was declared dead shortly after arriving at the hospital. The back seat contained 2 children. My recollection is that there was a girl of about 12 and a boy who was 8. They were both properly restrained, and other than obvious scrapes and bruises, neither appeared seriously injured. Their vitals were in good shape, and other than being in shock, they seemed to have appropriate levels of consciousness. Because of the difficulty getting into the vehicle, they were trapped, but they could see all of our efforts to resuscitate their mother. Because of her condition compared to theirs, the main effort of extrication was to get the mother out first. The children were safely removed a bit after she had been removed and transported. We transported the girl in our ambulance. Once back at the ER, the 2 children were thoroughly checked by the physicians and by radiology for any internal injuries or anything that we may have missed. Neither had anything significant. This is a story I was told by a police lieutenant I interviewed for a local paper. Halloween in a local town, they get a call to break up a fight in the front yard of a frat house. Police get there and push through the crowd, just in time to see one of the kids push the other into the street, where he's immediately hit by a speeding truck. Lieutenant said that the kid basically exploded and that it was the goriest scene he had ever witnessed. I'm not a cop, but the man I work for is a retired police officer. One day that will always stand out to him was when he got a call to go to a house when it sounded like gunshots went off. He came to the scene and entered the house. What he found was a man who had blown his own head off with a 12 gauge. That was horrific to him, but he later found in the house the man's children with holes in their back, as well as the man's wife with a hole in her back. The man had killed his family and himself. He was stunned by it. Chief of police gave him the rest of the day off. My dad was a Garda, basically an Irish police officer, and late one night he came across a hit and run, where a drunk driver had hit a bus carrying a lot of teenage students home from a trip. He came across it because they were checking out a creepy pink glow, which turned out to be the headlights that the blood had spilled into. In another instance, he had to sit in an ambulance with a body from a flaming car wreck, and for the hour-long drive, he had to look at the bone sticking out of the guy's leg, and said it put him off of having roast lamb for years. My friend's a cop. His second year in, he was the first on the scene to a very horrible head-on collision. Drunk guy lost control of his car at around 70, crossed the centre lane and hit a minivan. He said it looked like a bomb had gone off, car parts and glass sprayed over 5 lanes for 100 yards. He was trying to process what to do, with bystanders screaming and unrealistic amounts of blood everywhere. The drunk driver's passenger was killed immediately, and his face was smashed in from the steering wheel. The dad driving the van was screaming for his wife, who was clearly dead. The baby's car seat was not properly secured, so he was launched into the windshield. By the time the chopper arrived to evacuate the dad, my buddy was attempting CPR on the infant, the drunk driver was dead, and the father died later that day. 5 fatalities. He found out later that the baby had been internally decapitated, but he says he still feels like he should have been able to save someone. Any of them. If he had gotten there faster, or tried treating the different person first, or had better med gear in his car, he probably would have been able to. My father has been an officer for 20 plus years, and this story is probably the worst thing that he's ever had to do. My father and I were heading to the range one day to sight in our hunting rifles. We were in his police vehicle since we were going to the shooting range for local law enforcement personnel. Dispatch came over the radio to get an officer out to a 911 call of a possible dead body. Many of the officers joked over the radio that it was probably a prank or someone overreacting since it was around Halloween. The responding officer arrives at the scene and calls it in that he's going into the woods to investigate. A few minutes later, he sends out a call confirming that it's an actual dead body, and to get the necessary resources sent out to assist. Then the responding officer personally calls my father because he recognized the body. It was my dad's brother. He had been having rough times and decided to end it all by hanging himself from a tree 50 yards into the woods next to railroad tracks. The second worst part was that he had been reported missing for a few months, so by the time they found his body, he was severely rotted. The worst part was that my father had to go to assist in the removal and scene investigation. That day was the first time I ever saw my father cry, and I was in my mid-teens. One night at around 11:30, this guy jumps off a bridge into a bay. On the way down, he hits a guardrail, losing both forearms and the top of his head. One set of officers found his arm and set them aside. I was on the dive team, so we go to collect his remains. While we check on his condition, we notice the brain is missing. This was me flipping up his scalp and taking a peek inside to find nothing there. It's very strange to look for something very important and not find this. Anyway, we bag him up and get him on the boat. Our supervisor tells us that we have to at least look for his brains. So we dive in to look around, but the only thing that we found was a piece of his skull. And we had decided if we did find it, none of us wanted to grab it. It started as a ride-along during the academy in the summer of 2006. Showed up to do the ride-along and was immediately smiled at by the officer I rode with. Not a good sign. Come on man, let's go. This takes place in a small town in the Potato State. Usually really quiet with the weekly drunk calls and some drugs too. But this was different. We showed up to the already cordoned off house and walked in. There was blood everywhere. CSTs had already been there and collected the stuff they needed to, so we didn't really have to be careful where we stepped, other than to preserve our own clothing and shoes. We walked around the house, and it was like someone had taken a paint roller with red paint and hit it with an air compressor. We eventually made our way to the basement, where the worst scene took place. It truly looked like tomato soup with rice in puddles on the floor and splatter on the wall. Here's what happened. A husband found out that his wife had been cheating on him, so he went to his buddy's house and asked to borrow a shotgun. He waited, had breakfast at a local restaurant, then went back home. He knocked on the door and the wife answered. He shot his wife point blank in the chest. While Quentin Tarantino has it all wrong when it comes to gore, it's still fairly close when it's point blank. He proceeded up the hallway and killed his kids in their bedrooms. The cheater confronted him in the hallway and he hit him point blank too. He then went to the basement, turned on the radio, and shot himself in the head. I specifically mentioned that he turned on the radio because it was on softly as we entered the basement. I guess no reason to turn this off, so the CSTs didn't. I can't hear If You're Going Through Hell by Rodney Atkins without memories coming back.